The war had begun as a storm across Westeros, wild and unpredictable. But what if one decision, one alliance, had changed the course of history? Imagine a world where Robb Stark, the king in the north, heeds Catelyn Stark's advice not merely as a diplomatic errand, but as a genuine path to survival and power. When Lady Stark rides south to meet Renly Baratheon, she does not just observe his forces. She sees opportunity, strength, and a shared enemy, the Lannisters. In this altered tale, Robb Stark, understanding the strategic advantage, agrees to Renly Baratheon's proposal. Renly offers the power of over 100,000 men, Knights of the Reach, and Stormlands, in return for recognition of his kingship. Robb, though proud, is not foolish. He declares the North's support for Renly, demanding in turn that the North shall be granted full autonomy after the war is won. The two kings shake hands under the shadow of bitter winds and golden tents. This decision creates a political storm. The Lannisters, learning of the union, scramble to shore up alliances. Tywin Lannister repositions his armies westward, while Tyrion, now acting hand, intensifies his plotting within King's Landing. Cersei, rattled by the scale of the alliance, begins to see enemies not only outside the Red Keep, but within it too. Meanwhile, Stannis Baratheon, prideful and unbending, is furious. He had counted on Renly's troops for his own bid for the Iron Throne, and their alliance feels like a betrayal. As the twin kings, Renly and Robb, march together, their camps blend oddly. Northern bannermen eat and drink with Reach knights. Bannermen of House Florent exchange cold glances with Greatjon Umber. Tension simmers, but the joint command under Renly's charisma and Robb's reputation keeps the host intact. Sir Loras Tyrell, once skeptical of Robb, begins to respect him for his discipline and battle-hardened insight. Their plan is swift and brutal. Rather than wait, they strike south toward King's Landing while Renly leaves a contingent under Sir Garland Tyrell to shadow Stannis at Dragonstone. On their path through the Crown Lands, peasants flee or cheer, uncertain which king to support, but glad at the prospect of the Lannisters being challenged. The alliance first clashes with a Lannister, force near Duskendale, where Robb Stark personally leads the vanguard, proving his mettle even to the skeptical knights of the south. His direwolf, Grey Wind, terrifies the Lannister horses, scattering their formation. The battle is a stunning victory. At King's Landing, Tyrion prepares desperately. With wildfire stocks built up and alliances shaky, he fears an outright siege. Cersei grows paranoid and ruthless, ordering the execution of suspected traitors. Sansa Stark, still a hostage, learns of her brother marching with Renly and feels the first real hope since Ned's death. But the night before the allied army can launch its siege, a shadow falls, literally. Melisandre of Ashai, priestess of R'hllor, moves in silence on the orders of Stannis Baratheon. Using the dark magic she had once planned for Renly in solitude, she infiltrates the allied camp with a shadow birthed from her own body. This time, however, the target is not just Renly Baratheon. In a chilling moment just before dawn, Robb Stark awakens to a gust of unnatural cold. Grey Wind growls, pacing the tent. As the flap lifts without a hand, a figure of smoke and shadow steps inside. Robb rises to draw his sword, but it is too late. The shadow moves like wind, and his breath freezes in his throat. But Grey Wind attacks. The direwolf lunges, slamming into the shadow. There is a flash of firelight, a scream, not Robb's, but Melisandre's far across the sea. The shadow falters. Somehow, through the link between Stark and Wolf, the magic breaks. The shadow vanishes, and Robb collapses, alive but unconscious. The next morning, word spreads. Renly is dead, slain in the night, throat slit with no sound or trace. Sir Loras, mad with grief, accuses Stannis and calls for vengeance. The Tyrells are enraged, but stand down only when Robb, pale and shaken, speaks with them and urges calm. His near death convinces many that darker forces are at play. The alliance hangs by a thread, but Robb, now the only king on the battlefield, must decide: march on King's Landing in Renly's name, or return north and protect his crumbling home. The death of Renly Baratheon shattered the morale of the southern lords like shattered glass on a stone floor. His death was whispered to be sorcery, an unnatural end for a man in the prime of his strength. Many of the Storm Lords, especially House Tarth and House Caron, hesitated. But Robb Stark, still recovering from his encounter with the Shadow, stepped forward as the last remnant of their shared cause. His survival lent weight to the northern myths, and for the first time, Reachmen whispered of the old gods with something more than scorn. Sir Loras Tyrell demanded vengeance. His rage, once tightly contained in polished armor and smiling words, now threatened to explode. But it was Lady Olenna Tyrell, summoned swiftly to the front, who prevented a fracture. She met Robb with cold calculation and quick insight. She did not mourn her dead future son-in-law with tears, only strategy. She proposed that House Tyrell would continue to support Robb's campaign, but on one condition: Robb must marry Margaery. The North had already declared independence, and Robb had pledged himself to another. But the war had changed him. After surviving the Shadow's strike and losing Renly, Robb realized that feelings had no place in the world of crowns and blades. In this version of events, he writes to House Frey with careful diplomacy, offering titles, lands, and apologies, but breaking the betrothal. Walder Frey is furious, but buys silence for gold and false honor. The seeds of future betrayal still lie dormant, but for now the alliance holds. Robb and Margaery are married in a quiet ceremony in Bitterbridge. She smiles like a queen, and he nods like a soldier. Their union is more pact than passion, but the symbolism is enough. The Reach, the Stormlands, and the North now march under a single banner. The lion is cornered. In King's Landing, Tyrion watches the world close in. His scouts report that the combined host of Stark and Tyrell now numbers over 90,000, and they've bypassed every trap laid along the Rose Road. Stannis remains isolated, on Dragonstone, and his ships are watched closely by the Redwyne fleet, newly loyal to the Tyrell cause. The city is not ready. Joffrey plays king with a boy's cruelty, and Cersei clutches her son like a lioness in a burning den. Tyrion orders the wildfire placed throughout Blackwater Bay and the city's walls. But without Stannis' fleet to provide a diversion, his plan is half its original strength. Worse, there is division in the capital. Varys disappears into the depths of the city, sensing the tides shifting. Littlefinger flees to Harrenhal under the guise of managing chaos. Even Pycelle begins hoarding coin and sending ravens. When the army of the North and Reach arrives, the banners are overwhelming. Direwolves beside golden roses. The people of King's Landing, starving and scared, look down from the battlements and see no escape. Robb offers terms: surrender the city, turn over Cersei and Joffrey, and no blood will be spilled. Tyrion, knowing Cersei will never accept, prepares to burn the bay, but Margaery plays her part. Through hidden letters and quiet alliances, she reaches out to the city's nobles. Her beauty and name soften the people's anger. She offers food, leniency, and royal protection to those who swear to her and Robb. Sansa Stark, now brought to the gates during a parley, is allowed to speak. She tells the people of her father's murder and her brother's honor. The people, remembering the Mad King and fearing wildfire, begin to rise. A riot breaks out, not against the besiegers, but within the city. On the night of the full moon, a group of gold cloaks loyal to Janos Slynt attempts to open the gates. They fail, but it shows Tyrion that the city is lost. Cersei, mad with fear, prepares to kill Tommen and Myrcella rather than let them be taken. Jaime, still captive in River Run, is beyond her reach. She orders the wildfire lit, but it is too late. With the help of Varys, a small force loyal to Margaery sabotages the alchemist's stores. Only a fraction of the wildfire is ever used, burning a single Lannister ship in Blackwater Bay. The rest never sees the light of battle. At dawn, the gates open. Robb Stark, armored in gray and silver, enters King's Landing beside Margaery Tyrell and the Greatjon. The Iron Throne stands before him, and Joffrey is dragged from it by his own guards. Cersei is not found. Her chambers are empty, her handmaidens dead. Only a note remains, written in wine-soaked fury, blaming all but herself. Robb does not sit the Iron Throne. He places Margaery there, crowned Queen of the Seven Kingdoms by popular acclaim. Beside her, he stands not as King of the North, but as Lord Protector of the realm. And somewhere in the east, Daenerys Targaryen hears whispers of the Northmen who bent kings and queens alike. The coronation of Queen Margaery Tyrell was unlike any in recent memory. There was no wildfire explosion, no city in ruins, no screams echoing through the streets, only golden roses draped over red stone, and the silent presence of direwolves, stationed at every gate. The people of King's Landing, hungry for peace, accepted the new rule not with rebellion, but relief. Robb Stark stood beside the Queen, not as her subject, but as her sword. He refused the Iron Throne. That, he said, belonged to the South. The North would be its own once the realm was stable. Margaery, wise enough to know the cost of clinging too tightly, agreed. Their marriage had become something more than politics. A shared respect had formed, even if not love. She ruled from the throne, he from the field. In the early days of their reign, Robb sent ravens to the remaining great houses. To Dorne, he offered recognition of independence if they stayed out of the war. To the Vale, he promised safety and security, appealing to Lady Arryn's paranoia. House Martell remained neutral, but watchful. Littlefinger, sensing opportunity in the Vale, began his slow seduction of Lysa Arryn, seeking to carve out his own domain. But one threat remained: Stannis Baratheon. He had not yielded. Even with Renly gone and the Iron Throne taken by his brother's widow, Stannis sat brooding at Dragonstone, burning idols and dreaming of divine right. Melisandre whispered of a boy with wolf's blood and a crown of snow, prophecy misread. Or not, she urged him to strike before Robb's influence reached too far. With Davos's reluctant help, Stannis began building ships, but Robb was already moving. With the city stabilized, Robb and his council prepared for what they called the last battle of the War of the Five Kings. Margaery remained in King's Landing, governing with the help of her grandmother Olenna, Tyrion, now pardoned and named Master of Coin, and Sansa Stark, who had been given a place in court as Lady of Winterfell in exile. Varys worked in shadows to uncover Lannister loyalists, while the Tyrells quietly took control of the city's food, ports, and temples. Robb sailed from Blackwater Bay with a joint fleet of Tyrell ships and northern longships. His destination, Dragonstone. Before he could land, however, tragedy struck again. Melisandre, seeing that her visions now blurred with every passing day, cast her last desperate spell. At the height of a storm, she sacrificed Edric Storm, Robert Baratheon's bastard, in an attempt to curse Robb from afar. Fire danced in the flames, and she cried out that the usurper wolf would drown in salt and smoke. But the curse never took hold. Unknown to her, Davos Seaworth had hidden Edric and replaced him with a stable boy. The fire failed. And Melisandre knew in that moment that her god no longer answered. The landing on Dragonstone was swift and brutal. Robb led the assault himself, flanked by his bannermen and the Knights of the Reach. Stannis' men, hardened and devout, fought fiercely, but they were outnumbered and undersupplied. In the throne room of the ancient Targaryen keep, Robb and Stannis faced each other at last. "You are not the true king," Stannis said, sword in hand. "You are a boy playing at crowns." "I never wanted your throne," Robb replied. "But I won't let you burn the world to sit on it." They fought, not alone, but within a hall lit by fire and steel. And in the end, Stannis Baratheon, last of the true Baratheon line, was slain, not by Robb, but by Sir Garland Tyrell, who struck the killing blow as Stannis lunged for the Northern King. Melisandre tried to flee, but was captured and sent to the wall, bound and gagged. With Stannis dead and the Red Priestess gone, the war was truly over. Robb returned to King's Landing once more, not in triumph, but in exhaustion. He found Margaery, pregnant. She announced it quietly, without ceremony, in the Queen's chambers. The child, she said, would unite North and South as none before. Robb said nothing for a long moment. Then he nodded, kissed her brow, and went to his chamber alone. Word spread quickly across Westeros. The war was done, the Queen was with child, and Robb Stark was the hero of a generation. But peace, even forged in fire and sacrifice, is never without cracks. Far to the north, at the wall, ravens stopped returning. Wildlings gathered in numbers unseen before, and strange reports came from beyond the forest. White shadows, corpses that walked, and a wind that whispered of death. Robbie knew. His crown may have been made of gold, but winter still came. Peace had come to the Seven Kingdoms, but it was peace earned at the edge of a sword, held together by alliances, promises, and weariness. In the south, Queen Margaery ruled from the Iron Throne, her child growing within her. Robb Stark, Lord Protector of the realm, held command of the armies and the loyalty of the Reach and the North. The Lannisters were broken, the Baratheons scattered, and the throne secure. But beyond the wall, winter was stirring. Word finally reached King's Landing through a ragged band of brothers from the Night's Watch. Castle Black had been attacked. Not by wildlings, but by something worse. Creatures made of ice, walking corpses, and a cold that burned the flesh. Maester Aemon's last raven spoke of a threat greater than any king. Robb Stark knew it was not a rumor. The dreams had returned. Wolves running in frozen woods, snow falling on silent fields, shadows with blue eyes that did not blink. He had grown up with tales of the long night. But now, as a man who had survived war and kingship, he understood that myths were often warnings left unread. He summoned a council in the Red Keep. One last time. Tyrion, now trusted and weary, advised caution. Resources were strained, and the South would not march north easily. The Tyrells, flush with power but consumed by court politics, had no interest in a threat they could not see. Even Margaery, careful as always, asked for proof. "The people have barely tasted peace," she said. "To drag them into another war in the snow for an enemy they've never seen." But Robb could not wait. He wrote to the lords of the north, to the Vale, and even to Dorne. He sent ravens to the Iron Islands and the Riverlands. He asked for men, steel, and food, not to fight for thrones, but for survival. He then made one final, bold move. He gave up his title as Lord Protector. Margaery protested. So did the court. But Robb made it clear. There is only one war left that matters, and I won't fight it from a chair in a warm room. He kissed her goodbye, rested, his hand on her belly, and left King's Landing with his direwolf and his sword. Sansa wept as she watched her brother ride out. Tyrion simply nodded. "If you don't come back," he muttered, "we're all dead anyway." The march north began slowly, but surely. From the north, bannermen answered Robb's call. House Mormont, House Karstark, House Reed, and even the surviving sons of House Umber. Jon Snow, now First Ranger of the Night's Watch, sent word of what they had seen. The army of the dead was real, growing, and moving south. Samwell Tarly's studies in the ancient records revealed fragments of old knowledge: dragon glass, Valyrian steel, fire. Robb knew what he had to do. He made his way to Dragonstone, where Daenerys Targaryen had just landed with her small host, 3 dragons and a will of fire. In this altered world, she had not crossed swords with Robb Stark, nor suffered the betrayals of Meereen, nor met Jon Snow. She was still queen without a realm, still the breaker of chains, but now, faced with an ally instead of an enemy. Their meeting was tense. She had heard of the king in the north, now Lord Commander of the Realms, who had taken King's Landing without bloodshed and ruled beside a southern queen. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw no pride, only duty. Robb spoke of the dead, of the wall, of the long night. Daenerys listened. She agreed to march north with him, but not before she made one request. She must be allowed to help rebuild the world after it was saved. Robb, understanding the balance of power and the cost of saying no to fire, agreed. Their pact was sealed not in blood or marriage, but in trust and dragonfire. Together, their armies marched to Winterfell, a place Robb had not seen in years. It was ruined, but rebuilding. Bran was there, no longer a boy, but something else, cold, distant, yet filled with knowing. Arya returned too, silent and deadly, her eyes sharper than the blades she carried. The pack was home again, if only briefly. And beyond the wall, the army of the dead moved ever south. Jon Snow met Robb atop the battlements. They embraced like brothers who had seen too much and said too little. There was no time for memories, only plans. The wall would not hold. The north would be the battleground. Winterfell would be the last stand before the south. And in the distance, the snow began to fall. Snow fell thick and slow upon the fields of Winterfell, blanketing the ancient land in silence. But beneath that silence was tension, the kind that precedes a storm not of wind, but of death. For the first time in 1,000 years, the greatest houses of Westeros stood together not for thrones, not for pride, but for life itself. Robb Stark rode along the battlements, watching the army assemble. Stark banners flapped beside the 3-headed dragon of House Targaryen. Knights of the Reach, hard-eyed men of the Vale, wildlings led by Tormund Giantsbane, and the sworn brothers of the Night's Watch all gathered at the call of one man, the boy once called the Young Wolf, now simply Robb. Jon Snow stood beside him. Their reunion had not been warm, but it had been real. There was no need for speeches. Both had been forged by war. Bran, changed beyond recognition, sat quietly in a wheelchair beneath the weirwood tree, saying little but knowing much. Arya moved through the halls like a ghost, blades always near. The pack was whole again, though none of them were who they once were. Daenerys arrived with her dragons circling above the frost-covered trees. Her army, though smaller than it once might have been, carried the presence of legend. Dragon roared from the clouds as if to announce her arrival to the dead themselves. She met with Robb in the crypts of Winterfell, where the old kings lay sleeping. There, beneath the stone statues of Stark ancestors, they made their final plan. "The Night King is not just a general," Robb said. "He's a symbol. If he falls, his army shatters." Daenerys nodded. "And only fire or dragonglass can do it. My dragons can burn a path, but we need to find him first." Bran, sitting by the cold tomb of Lyanna Stark, looked at them both, with eyes that seemed too old for his face. "He will come here, for me. I am the memory of men. He wants to erase us all." Robb turned to Jon. "Then we make our stand here. And so it began. Winterfell was fortified with obsidian and steel. Blacksmiths forged weapons from dragon glass mined at Dragonstone, while archers coated their arrows with it. Trenches were dug, set with fire traps, and lined with spears. Everyone, from highborn ladies to kitchen hands, prepared for the siege. Gendry Baratheon worked at the forges day and night. His arms burned raw by the fire. On the eve of the battle, Robb walked, the grounds of Winterfell quiet. He saw Samwell Tarly sharpening weapons beside Podrick Payne. He passed Brienne of Tarth kneeling before her sword. He nodded to Theon Greyjoy, who had returned to defend the castle he once betrayed. Even Jaime Lannister stood at the walls, a one-handed knight ready to die for the realm. There were no kings left, only survivors. That night, Robb sat beside Jon, Arya, and Daenerys before the fire. They said little. Only when Jon rose and left to speak with Daenerys alone did Robb speak to Arya. "Promise me," he said, "if I fall, protect Bran, protect the North." Arya gave no oath. She simply nodded and disappeared into the dark. Then, the horns blew. The dead had come. They arrived like a wave, silent and endless, eyes glowing blue, limbs stiff and soulless. The battle began before the sun rose, in darkness lit only by fire and moonlight. Daenerys flew overhead, Drogon and Rhaegal burning swathes of undead, but the Night King was nowhere to be seen. Viserion, the fallen dragon, answered with cold. Blue flame from the northern skies. Chaos reigned. The Unsullied held the front lines, their discipline holding even as they were overwhelmed. The Knights of the Vale flanked from the east. Wildlings fought like demons. Lyanna Mormont slew a giant before being crushed beneath its weight. Arya danced through the halls, a shadow with a dagger of dragon glass. Jon clashed with White Walkers. On the eastern flank, his Valyrian steel blade meeting ice again and again. And Robb fought at the gates. He led the charge whenever the line buckled. Grey wind tore through the dead, and Robb's sword sang in the cold air. Wounded, bloodied, and breathless, he refused to fall back. He fought like the wolf the North had named him. But the Night King had not come for the walls. He came for the tree. Bran sat alone beneath the weirwood, guarded by Theon and a handful of men. As the White Walkers approached, Theon fought them, off one by one, until only he remained. Robb arrived too late. Theon lay dying. Bran's eyes rolled back as he watched the battle through the eyes of crows. And then, the Night King stepped through the flames. He raised his hand. The fire parted. Robb faced him, alone. Valyrian steel in hand, he charged. They clashed beneath the weirwood tree, steel meeting ice, fury meeting stillness. The Night King fought with inhuman precision, ancient and cold. Robb, bleeding from his side, fought with rage and purpose, but he was only a man. The Night King disarmed him, lifted his icy blade, when suddenly a scream pierced the sky. Arya! She leapt from the shadows, dagger in hand. The Night King caught her, but Robb, using his last strength, drove a piece of dragon glass into the night. King's chest, the icy blade dropped. The Night King screamed and shattered into 1,000 frozen shards, and with him, the army of the dead collapsed. The long night was over, but the cost had only just begun. Dawn broke over Winterfell, but it brought no joy. Smoke rose from the charred fields, black against the pale sky. Bodies, tens of thousands, lay in silence. Man and beast, dead and undead. The snow was stained red, and the air stank of fire and rot, but above it all, the wind whispered with something close to peace. The dead were gone. Robb Stark awoke 3. Days later, he had nearly died, his ribs shattered, lungs bruised, blood frozen to his armor. But he lived. Maester Wolkan said it was a miracle. Some said it was more than that. When he rose from the bed, every man and woman in the castle knelt. Even Daenerys Targaryen. Even Jon Snow. They had seen him drive the dagger home. They had seen him face death and win. He was no longer the king in the north. He was something else. But Robb, ever the son of Ned Stark, refused to wear a crown again. "We won't survive another war of kings," he said quietly. "No more thrones. No more songs about who should rule. The war is done." And yet, Westeros was not at peace. Far to the south, Queen Margaery still ruled from the Iron Throne. Her son, Robb's son, had been born during the Long Night. House Tyrell declared him heir to the realm, a king born during the War for the Dawn, they said. A prince of unity, but unity was already cracking. Some lords whispered that Robb should return to King's Landing and take the throne himself, truly, openly, that a man who had faced the Night King had more right to rule than any child. Others feared Daenerys. Her dragons had burned swathes of undead, yes, but they had also nearly killed friend and foe alike. She had fought for Westeros, but it had not forgotten her bloodline, nor her fire. And then there was Jon Snow. He had grown in the war, not as a lord, but as something deeper. He had led men through the ice and fire. He had won the hearts of both wildlings and nobles. When Daenerys looked at him, she saw not just a man, but a rival. And he, in turn, had begun to look at her with wary eyes. The North still called him brother. The free folk called him king. Samwell Tarly had shared the truth of his birth. Jon was Aegon Targaryen, last true-born son of Rhaegar, and that changed everything. Robb, recovering in the Godswood, listened as the winds shifted again. He spoke with Jon beneath the weirwood tree where Bran had once sat, quiet and staring into the distance. "You know what they'll ask of you," Robb said. Jon shook his head. "I don't want it. You've earned everything they want to give me." "But blood matters," Robb replied, "and your blood makes you a threat." Daenerys approached them days later. She had seen how the people looked at Jon now, not with awe, but hope. She was still queen, yes, but she could feel her crown slipping. "We should rule together," she said to Jon. "Unite the blood of the dragon and the wolf." Jon said nothing, but Robb knew. The war for the throne had ended. But the game for power was beginning again. Robb refused to return south. He sent Gendry Baratheon to Storm's End, naming him its rightful lord and placing him under the protection of the North. He wrote to Sansa in King's Landing, asking her to protect Margaery's child as if it were her own. Arya rode west, following a path that no longer involved crowns or bloodlines. And then Bran spoke. He had remained mostly silent since the Long Night, but now, as the realm began to fracture again, he said what no one else dared. "Daenerys will not stop," he said. "She sees fire as justice, and fire burns." Robb met with Daenerys in the ruins of the Great Hall. He looked her in the eyes and said, "You've helped save the world. Let that be your legacy. Step aside." She didn't answer. Her dragons circled above. That night, Robb wrote one last letter. He addressed it to Queen Margaery, Tyrion Lannister, Sansa Stark, Gendry Baratheon, Davos Seaworth, and Jon Snow. It spoke of unity, of a council to rule Westeros in peace, no more thrones, no more kings, just voices. And then he disappeared. Some say he sailed north, beyond the Wall, seeking peace among the free folk. Others claim he died quietly in Winterfell, buried beside the old kings. No one saw him again. But legends grew, of the wolf who refused, a crown, of the king who ended the long night, then vanished with the snow. And somewhere far away, Daenerys looked toward the Iron Throne with eyes full of fire and dreams unfulfilled. Spring crept slowly across the blood-soaked land of Westeros. melting the frost of war, but not its consequences. With Robb Stark gone, his fate uncertain, his legacy undeniable, the realm found itself in unfamiliar territory, a world without. A clear ruler without warlords calling for battle, yet with tensions simmering beneath a fragile peace. In King's Landing, Queen Margaery Tyrell ruled in name, her infant son Aegon, the Spring Prince, resting in her arms, unaware that the realm was being shaped in his name. Sansa Stark stood beside her as the Queen's advisor, soft-spoken but sharp-minded. The court viewed them as a symbol of unity between the North and South, but power breeds suspicion. Behind smiles and gowns, the Queen's court was thick with whisperers. Tyrion Lannister, still serving as Master of Coin, grew weary of the intrigues. He sensed the coming storm. As rumors of Robb's disappearance spread, factions formed. Some whispered he was dead. Others claimed he had sailed east to escape the burden of power. A few believed he had been assassinated by Daenerys. Meanwhile, Daenerys Targaryen had made her camp at Dragonstone. She had not returned to King's, landing after the Battle of Winterfell. The scars of that war had changed her. She had flown above the dead, rained fire upon them, saved thousands, and yet still it was Robb Stark they praised. Jon Snow they respected. Even Margaery now held the throne she had once dreamed of, and she, the mother of dragons, had been asked to step aside. Her fury simmered, silent and deep. With Drogon and Rhaegal now grown to terrifying size, she had power that no one else could match. Her army, though thinned, was fiercely loyal. Grey Worm and the Unsullied followed her without question. Missandei stood at her side, the last of her original inner circle. But her knights were restless. The North still resisted her. The lords of the Vale and Dorne had not bent the knee. And Jon Snow, he remained silent. He had returned to the Wall, retreating from politics. He had buried his knowledge of his parentage. The truth, that he was Aegon Targaryen, was now known to only a few, Samwell, Bran, and Varys, and they had kept it secret, for now. But secrets are short-lived in Westeros. Varys, ever the spider, began planting whispers, not to place Jon on the throne, but to prepare the realm for the idea. What if the true heir was a man of peace, a man who didn't want power? He said to those who would listen. Daenerys heard the rumors, and once again she saw her future burning away before her. At the same time, Lady Olenna Tyrell fell ill. Her mind, once sharp and venomous, began to slip, and with her waning presence, the Tyrell grip on the capital loosened. Lords who had once sworn loyalty now waited, unsure whether to cling to the infant king or hedge their bets elsewhere. Then came the Raven from the Vale. Lord Robin Arryn, under the guidance of Pater Baelish, declared that the Vale would not recognize any monarch without a great council to decide the future of the realm. The Lord's declarant supported him. The North, led now by Lady Sansa and acting Warden Rickon Stark, backed the idea reluctantly. Dorne remained aloof, but hinted they would attend. Only one refused, Daenerys. "I have dragons," she said coldly to her council. "Let them hold their council. I will hold the sky." Jon Snow came to Dragonstone once more. He met her on the cliffs where waves crashed below. She saw him and softened for a moment. "I fought beside you," he said. "I saw your strength. You deserve a place in this world, but not through fire, not through fear. I gave everything," she whispered. "And now they wish to cast me aside, again." "I don't want the throne," he told her, "but if you make them fear you, you'll never rule them." That night she left Dragonstone. On Dragonback, Daenerys flew toward King's Landing, not to destroy it, but to demand her crown. But Queen Margaery, warned by Varys, had already called for the council to be convened at Harrenhal, a neutral ground, scorched and broken by fire, but symbolically perfect for the forging of a new realm. The Great Council was called, the first in 100 years. Lords and ladies from every corner of Westeros gathered. The Riverlands, the Vale, the Stormlands, the Reach, the North, Dorne. Jon Snow, urged by Samwell, was summoned as well. Even Gendry Baratheon was given a seat, legitimized now with the Stormlands at his back. Tyrion came as both an advisor and witness. Sansa stood tall, draped in the gray and white of House Stark. Arya returned from the west, uninvited, but unquestioned. Then Daenerys arrived. No fanfare, no blood, just the shadow of a dragon passing over the crumbled towers of Harrenhal, and silence. The question was simple. Who would rule? But the answer would shake the realm once more. The great hall of Harrenhal had never known silence like this. Lords and ladies from every corner of Westeros stood shoulder to shoulder beneath its scorched, crumbling rafters. The echoes of old kings whispered through the stone, but none were louder than the question before them now. Who would rule the realm? At the center of it all stood Daenerys Targaryen. She wore no crown, she carried no banners, but her presence was undeniable. Drogon circled high above, casting his winged shadow over the gathering like a dark omen. Her silver hair gleamed in the light of braziers, and her violet eyes, sharp with pain and pride, moved across the chamber like drawn blades. She did not kneel. "I am the last of my house," she said. "I brought dragons back to the world. I helped defeat the Night King. I bled for this realm when others cowered behind walls. The throne is mine by fire, blood, and right." A murmur spread through the room. Some nodded. Some shifted uneasily. Others looked to the shadows where the real threat waited, not in fire, but in silence. Jon Snow stood behind the table, near Samwell and Sansa. He said nothing. But when Tyrion Lannister cleared his throat and stepped forward, the chamber braced itself. "There is no doubt," Tyrion said, "that Daenerys Targaryen saved Westeros. Without her dragons, we would all be whites. Without her courage, we would still kneel to Lannisters or worse." He turned to face her. "But fire alone does not forge peace, and fear is not the same as love." She narrowed her eyes. "You speak of love, but what do these people know of it? They cheered for Robb Stark. They'll cheer for Jon Snow. They don't care about bloodlines, they care about winning. I won," Tyrion nodded solemnly. "But Robb Stark chose not to rule. He gave them peace and walked away." Another silence. Then Sansa stepped forward. "My brother was never perfect, but he bled for all of us. When Renly fell, he made an alliance. When the realm burned, he chose unity. He killed the Night King and asked for nothing in return. And when peace came, he vanished. That's the kind of ruler we should honor. Not one who demands the throne, but one who deserves it and walks away." "I will not let my legacy be stolen," Daenerys said, voice trembling now, not with fear, but fury. Then Bran spoke, quiet, detached, almost cold. "You saw the long night and thought it was your trial," he said to Daenerys. "But that wasn't the end of the game. It was the end of the board, and now we must build something new." Varys stood, cloaked in gray. "Then let it be decided by those who've lived through fire and frost. Let the realm choose. No more. Birthrights. No more gods or dragons. Let there be a council." Gendry Baratheon, seated beside Davos, nodded. "The Stormlands agree." Robin Arryn raised his hand. "The Vale supports it." The Dornish princess, silent until now, gave a single, graceful nod. Dorne, too. Jon Snow finally looked up. His voice, quiet and strained, cut through the air. "If we are truly building something new, I will not stand in its way. I am not a king, and I never wanted to be." Daenerys looked at him, eyes full of heartbreak and disbelief. "Even you?" He didn't answer. Tyrion turned to the room. "Then let us choose a ruler, not forever, not for a dynasty, but for now. A council of lords and ladies to govern together, and a leader to speak for all." Eyes turned to Jon, but he shook his head. "My place is the wall, or what remains of it." They turned to Daenerys. She said nothing. Then, finally, Sansa spoke. "Then let the first ruler chosen by the realm be Bran Stark." Gasps followed, but Bran's calm stare silenced them. "He knows our history," Sansa said. "He cannot father heirs, so the next leader will be chosen as well. And he is the only one among us untouched by ambition." Daenerys stared in disbelief. "You choose the cripple over the queen?" "I choose the realm over revenge," Sansa replied. One by one they voted. The Reach, the Vale, the Riverlands, the North, the Stormlands, Dorne, the Iron Islands. Bran the Broken was chosen as king, not by blood, but by consent. Daenerys did not stay for the coronation. She flew east, never to return. Some say she built a new kingdom in the Shadowlands. Others say Drogon carried her to Valyria. Her fire burned too brightly for a world that no longer needed flames. And Robb Stark, he was never seen again. But he became legend. Songs were sung of the Wolf King who refused the throne, of the alliance with Renly that saved the realm, of a man who fought not for crowns, but for people. The Seven Kingdoms became a realm of 9 voting regions, ruled by council. Thrones faded, wars dimmed. And so the game ended not with victory, but with choice. A song of ice and fire rewritten. By unity, and the North, forever proud, stood independent, silent, strong, watching, just in case winter ever came again.